even before I walked into the building at 1:30 p.m., I could feel a sense of awe just come out through the worship that you could feel reverberate through the building. And as I went in there, I was quite surprised, to be honest.
Standing there in Hughes and just singing like holy, holy, holy for like 30 minutes straight. No musical instrument leading, no like person leading like with a mic. It was just like the audience. It's just like it takes your breath away.
I felt the love of God filling the room. And I saw what was happening in the worship dynamic. I saw what was happening in people all around the room, and I was feeling it. It was like it hit me in the chest. And all I could do was stand at the back and join in. It was my first impulse. It was just to join in the worship.
You know, as a kid, you grow up and you're like, you're going to be worshiping the Lamb in heaven 24 hours a day. And you're like, okay, that sounds really boring, right? But I remember thinking that thought, like when we were experiencing it, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, oh, this is not boring. This is the most moving, emotional, spiritual, physical experience in my life. And I don't want to leave.
It was a little bit too much to take in on first sight. One, because it seemed so ordinary and basic, but at the same time, it seemed so pure and rich.
It was extraordinary. No celebrities, no focus on the worship leaders. I've heard others say this, but it was so true that the students that were leading weren't ministering to the room. It was almost they were unaware of what was happening in the room. They were ministering to Jesus. The purity of worship was extraordinary.
No one was coming to receive something from the worship leader. People were coming to bring their offering to the Lord. And in his goodness and his kindness, he meets us in that place, and we receive ultimately. But there was a flipping of roles, for sure, that it was all vertical in a sense.
You would sometimes worship and sing, sometimes you would just stop and let it wash over you, sometimes you would sit, stand, you would just move in it, drink it up, and pray into it. It was just this beautiful experience of lingering, waiting, unrushed, just tarrying with the Lord. He could do anything then.
We've just heard stories upon stories. People just didn't want to leave. And there was lots of nights that I left and didn't get a whole lot of sleep and got back as soon as possible because it was just too sweet to miss.
And from the beginning, there was we had a deep shared commitment that a diversity of faces and voices, ethnicities as part of that team would really be the core of our worship experience for the next 16 days. And so I think our worship coordinator, she deeply held that in her soul.
There was maybe a handful of teams that were not ethnically diverse, but the vast majority were ethnically diverse, and not just majority white and then a person of color, but we had Latino teams, we had majority Black, African American teams, and the process very much became, okay, what's the team that's leading, and then who's the team we're preparing on deck?
There's no plan with songs. I think at some teams probably was okay, this is our first song, but usually it was choosing a key and then going up there and just letting the Spirit lead because they didn't have time to plan. They didn't have time to really prepare.
There was a gift to urgency. There was a gift to kind of doing it on the fly. It wasn't lax and frivolous and negligent. It was so significant and had so much gravity to us. But realizing that, we don't have a lot of time here. We can't overthink it. And so all we were left with were essentials.
There was no lighting. There was no sound box equipment. There was no smoke screen. There was no drum kit. There was no bass guitar.
There was a moment actually sitting in the auditorium where we got into the building, and a friend of mine who's a pastor in New York had said, "Hey, Al, you're going to be gloriously disappointed, but just go and sit there."
A simple band, no lyrics on the screen, probably a massively inadequate sound system if you'd ask any sound engineer for a room that size. But I think the thing that struck me the most was just the volume of the congregation singing. It wasn't like, we're going to start with the big fast song to welcome you in. It was like just straight in, high praise and adoration. We're not going to try and hype up the crowd. We're not going to use tracks or click or any of the levers that we pull to sort of rouse a congregation.
There was a way in which I believe the Lord kind of prompted me to kind of go off the beaten path, so to speak, and not just do verse, chorus, bridge, right? To kind of create an atmosphere where we could sing more spontaneously and to really have this outward expression of our desperation for God, and to give permission to go there, to be raw. Like, you don't have to, sing on key, and you don't have to have it all together. You can actually bare your heart before God.
What you heard was this harmonious, unified congregational singing, where it looked like everyone was participating, everyone was engaged, they're unified in love.
What I think I've witnessed in church in the last 10 years is what's happening on the stage, and all the instrumentation and all the sonic quality of it is the instrument, and the people at best are the accompaniment. And they're mostly not singing in most places that I go. Boy, it got flipped there. And I think that could be really, really good for the church, is the recovery of the body as the instrument of worship. My body and the body of the people gathered.
What I felt like was happening in the room was that pure, unveiled step that people take when they get beyond singing songs into truly ministering to the Lord and responding to Him. And I felt that from those leading worship, and I felt it from those in the congregation. There was less of a sense of, I'm here for me, and more of an all attention fixed on the Lord. And I sense that in my heart.
And when you have this consecrated house, what you begin to get is a ministry to the Lord.
The worship that we experienced was not polished. It had no tech behind it, and it really was not necessarily all based on a whole lot of talent. We're just invited out of the prompting of the Spirit. We didn't really know their level of talent, but it was pure. It was as pure as it could be.
They would gather in this back room called the Messy of Messies. It was very, very small. But they would sit in that room, and they would have meetings sporadically throughout the day, and they would talk about, what is Jesus saying? Where does God want to go? And so I remember I would watch them go, you see that girl in the second row over there? Why don't you go ask her if she can sing? So you go over there, you go, can you sing? The Spirit of God's highlighting me. And 9 times out of 10, they would go, yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm a worship leader from this far off town, or this state over here, or this country over here. Wow, how did you know?
I get down on the stage and start leading worship. At a certain point, I kind of got tapped on the shoulder, and a 19-year-old student said, we'd like to have someone else, take over on guitar. And I said, sure. But I kind of had this odd sense of I just got yanked from the stage. Did I do something wrong? What was the matter? And so I go up to the student later, and I just said, is everything okay? He kind of sheepishly looked down to the ground, and he said, yeah, just a couple members of our team just kind of had a check that maybe your heart wasn't in the right place.
It was so not about the gifting of the individual. It really mattered so little. We didn't need the best communicators. And sometimes the worship band was not who we would have chosen for chapel. nothing like that mattered anymore. It was only the heart. It was not the talent. It became meaningless. Like talent became completely unimportant, not even a part of the conversation.
My first instincts were just sort of pride, like, you don't know who I am. I've been leading worship a long time. Like, I'm not coming into this hot, wanting to be somebody. I wasn't, didn't think I was. But I said to them, you know what, let's pray about it.
There was no room for any pride. There was no room for any ego. There was no room for any credential. It didn't matter what songs you'd written. It didn't matter how many streams you had on Spotify. It didn't matter if people liked the worship that you did or didn't like the worship. Not all of that would you be willing to lay down essentially everything you know, step in, and allow him to fill you and pour out.
We just got down on the steps there in the chapel and just said, like, Lord, if there's anything in my heart that you want to work on, I'm open. Like, speak to me, do it, you know? And what I didn't know then that I would come to know, you know, within 3, 4, 5, 6 days in the space, I think I was there 11 days total. There was so much that the Lord wanted to do in my heart.
One of the gifts of what's happened in the Asbury Outpouring is a bit of a clarion call to worship leaders to reset, to remember, to re-engage with things that last rather than simply shine and shimmer.
I wasn't intending to come in sort of prideful, like I know something, but honestly, I was coming in like I knew how to do something that I've done for 23 years. What I experienced was, in comparison to the consecration of heart of these young worship leaders and the way in which they were ministering to Jesus as worship leaders, I knew nothing. I was a total student.
A big thing was for people not to lead before they had experienced God's presence. So we got them together, and then we sent people to the consecration room.
A place where we sent that ragtag team of worship leaders each time to just go and just posture themselves before the Lord. If there's anything that they needed to lay down, anything that they needed to let go of, any healing that needed to happen, like before they led worship, then that was the place. So it could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, but that was like just a point for them to just be prepare their hearts for worshiping. And like a lot of people told me afterwards, it's like Lord was ministering to me as well as I was worshiping, as I was leading.
About a week later, some of the worship leaders came to me and they said, we have a slot we'd like you to lead worship with. And we went to the consecration room and then we came down to the stage, and it was 12:30 in the afternoon to an empty room. And so me and that guy led worship for an hour, poured it out, and it was without a doubt the most meaningful experience of leading worship in my life. Having come through that and leading worship to none but Jesus himself in an empty room, like, has forever changed me.
There was a process that Jesus was teaching us about how do you lead worship in a way that honors the heart of God. You allow Jesus to minister to your heart first.
We want our music to be as good as it can possibly be for the glory of God. But if it was a choice between like an average musician with a consecrated heart and a phenomenal musician whose heart isn't consecrated, we're going for the consecrated heart every day of the week.
The invitation and the challenge is, am I inviting our team into that life of consecrated life? Are we actually valuing righteousness, justice, holiness above and beyond any sort of gifting that we have?
Those students lingered. And so we lingered that first night, through the night. And we began to experience this beautiful work of God in our waiting, which is nothing more than Jesus' instruction to the disciples after the ascension: just go to Jerusalem and wait, which I think to some extent the Western church has almost forgotten how to do. We are so programmed and planned that we don't give any waiting to God.
Song, prayer, song. We have message, song, and everything is time framed because we've got a 60-minute service. And then we got to get people out so that we can come in and we can do it all again. Where are we allowing moments of lingering? Where are we actually allowing moments for the Holy Spirit to move?
This was a very expectant, almost straining waiting. Can we wait a little more? Can we just do, it's like in weightlifting, maybe one more rep. I think I've got one more rep in me. We would just say, okay, let's just go a little longer, just one more. And it would be in that where something would shift, something would move and change. And we would just know, oh my goodness, something is happening. And there would be a new level of response or a new depth.
And it transitioned into this exuberant joy. We started singing about joy being down deep in our souls. Began to push back against like all the depression and the anxiety and the suicidal ideation. I really believe that there was a beautiful moment there that we had together. And then again, when things would calm down again, there'd be this gentle hush of God's presence.
So we waited with that for a moment, and then another moment. And then like in the balcony over me, I heard these Latina women began to sing Yeshua. And they started to sing Yeshua, and the words like floated over the balcony and down into the congregation. And it was like heaven like split open, and then the whole congregation began to sing. At that moment, I was like, this is like, we don't even need a worship leader. Like, the presence of Jesus is so present here that the people rise up and lead themselves in worship. And we were all together in one spirit, and it transcended ethnicity and nationality and language. And it was such a holy moment.
This is one of the, I believe, the real learnings for the body of Christ today and for local churches, is to create space for hunger to linger. And when hunger becomes honest, you have humility.
And when you linger long enough, you'll find that people hit this moment of confrontation of either I'm gonna dial out, or I'm here to meet with Jesus, maybe I'll just press in. And in that moment of confrontation, when people press in, they encounter more of Jesus and his presence.
Even as I look at what happened at Asbury, it's in those lingering spaces, extended, sometimes even just instrumental. And the Spirit says, I'm going to do something. I'm just going to make this happen, and it's not going to be about your mechanisms making it happen. I'm going to do something, but what he seems to do is do it with hearts that have become tender and very vulnerable.
It doesn't matter if there's one person in the room or 1,000 and thousands more watching online, because it's not about them, it's about him.
A lot of people have shared about how simple worship was, but I think there's this great encouragement that goes with that is you can take somebody that doesn't know how to play the guitar very well, maybe even sings off key, and I mean the Spirit of the Lord can fall in that space.
There's a great reset button that's been pushed. And if the Asbury Outpouring has changed anything for me, it's that we have to allow Jesus to minister to us. We have to consecrate, surrender our plans, our visions. We have to build a Spirit-responsive heart. We have to allow the Spirit of God to lead moments and movements, and we have to be willing to adjust everything at his beckoning.
The spiritual authority we seek in the roles that we have is not purchased on a stage. It happens in the secret place. What Asbury kind of put a spotlight on again is that what's happening between the worshiper and their ministry to the Lord that we all have is the point. I think this was a great grand reorientation or reset, that we are all ministering to the Lord in worship. The worship leader is simply taking a secret life and then opening it up, and then we're facilitating that common voice of response to the Spirit.